God shows up in the big things and in the small things. We're going to talk about seeing the love of God in the small things happening in your life. So, I was a rookie pastor. I suppose this was 1978. And God whispered to me one day and he said, I want you to preach a sermon on how I love you. And I sat down and realized I had no idea how God loved me, and I had no idea how to preach a sermon on it. Because all I could say in the sermon was, beloved, God loves you. And I'd have to sit down. And I realized everybody's going to be just like me going, okay, but what does that mean? So God began to speak to me, and He didn't teach me in big things. He taught me in the small things. For example, at that time I was still practicing law. I was working two jobs. I was pastoring, but I was also trying cases, and I would try cases at the Wake County Courthouse, and before I'd go home, God would tell me, walk across the street to Hudson Belt and buy something for Gloria. Not some big giant thing, but buy some little thing that's a nice, sweet, pretty thing. Take it home to Gloria and don't make a big deal. Just walk in the door and give it to her. And I began to realize that God was teaching me how to love my wife, not in the big gestures, but in everyday things, and with gestures and with kindness on a daily basis. So, for example, the other week I am at a friend's house and we're meeting with some men for breakfast. And before I go home, the brother takes me out in his backyard. They had a big backyard and tomato vines, and all these little tiny tomatoes had come ripe. And so we picked 2 pounds of these little tiny cherry tomatoes of multiple different varieties and types. And I go home and I walk in the house here, and Gloria's standing there with a paper that was a printed out version of a recipe for cherry tomato pie. And she says, I got this wonderful recipe. She's all excited. We need to go get 2 pounds of fresh picked cherry tomatoes, small tomatoes of different kinds. And I just told out the bag. And I realized, and we both saw, how much God loved us in that little tiny thing of me walking in with the cherry tomatoes. So that night, Gloria made it that afternoon. And that night, we're sitting there eating this meal that God provided that day. And with that little thing, see, He's teaching us about the love of God. For example, Gloria, after we were full-time in the ministry, she really didn't like driving up to a T intersection with traffic and having to get into the flow of the traffic. So she prayed and said, Lord, would you please send me a traffic angel? And I thought that was a ridiculous prayer. What did God care about our driving? We were driving like everybody else. Well, sure enough, after about 3 days, Gloria pulls up to the intersection. I'm sitting in the seat next to her. And she says, Lord, would you have that angel stop the traffic? And I want you to know, within 10 seconds, the cars disappeared. And I'm looking both ways, no cars. Gloria's looking both ways. And then, like the way Gloria does, she sort of sedately takes her time and gets into the road and drives on. Just looking at me. We're both going, well, isn't that something? God loves us enough in the small thing of helping Gloria drive her car and get into the traffic. So we've been using that ever since. And it's an extraordinary thing to see God love you in the little tiny things. We would take our sons to Raleigh on a big adventure. We didn't have any money. I had quit practicing law and preaching and pastoring this little tiny church called Jubilee Fellowship in Fuquay-Varina, North Carolina. So we didn't have any money to do any grand thing, But we would take the boys out and drive up to Raleigh, and on the way, we would pray for God to give us a specific parking place. On the back street across Salisbury Street from the Wake County Courthouse, there was a parking deck back there, and up on the top level there was one spot that pulled right in front of the elevator, and you could walk 5 feet and get in the elevator and be down on Salisbury Street. And so we would pray for God to give us a parking spot there on the top floor of the parking deck. And the boys would pray and I'd pray, and it was ridiculous. Other people would hear us pray and think, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" But we would pray, and then we would drive up to top level of the parking deck, and we would drive around the far end, and I'd slow the car down. And we'd look around, and every time, you know what we would see? There would be a car in that spot, and the reverse lights would come on, and the car would back out. And all the boys are going, "All right, let's get our spot. Time to go. Let's go down and get a Wendy's." So we would pull into that spot that it was like God reserved it for us every single time. Now see, if you want to learn about the love of God, you can think about all these grand things you'd like to do. Maybe I want to go to China, or God will do this. But I want to tell you, God will show up in the everyday small things of your life. And He'll teach you how much He loves you in the small thing. And then see, if you learn about the small thing, God loves me. He can give me parking places. You can drive anywhere in the world and pray. And God's that traffic angel, Glorious, you can borrow Glorious traffic. Well, maybe you can't, but I can. I have special permission. I can borrow her traffic angel, and anywhere I go, God will, in that little small thing, give me a parking place. Everybody else thinks I'm crazy. I'm learning about the love of God. And see, if you learn about the love of God in those little tiny things, guess who you are when the big thing comes along and it's 3 a.m. in the emergency room. It's whatever it is, something has happened that's big. You've instructed your heart over and over, over and over and over. And this knowledge base has been built up. This is who God is. And He loves me. And if He loves me in that small thing, if He gave us that cherry tomato pie 2 Mondays ago, don't you think He's going to show up when it's serious, when it's important, maybe when it's a desperate time for us or somebody else? Absolutely. So listen, we're going to talk more about this as time goes on. Walk in the Spirit in the small things. Ask God for small things. I asked God, I wanted Him to teach me about walking in the Spirit. So I asked Him, Lord, would you tell me when to go to the barbershop when I don't have to wait in line to get a haircut? I'm going to quit worrying about going to the barbershop. So I quit worrying about it. I didn't have it on a schedule. Didn't look at my hair. Well, you know. And then God would all of a sudden, it would be like all of a sudden it was a good idea. It'd be a good idea to go to the barbershop. It wasn't like God said from heaven, you know, with the reverb on, go to the barbershop. It just was a good idea. So I get in the car. It's a good idea. I go to the barbershop, walk in, and the barber's standing there with his arm on the chair. Nobody in the barbershop saying, "Where you been?" That's learning. That's giving God an opportunity to love you up in the small things. So listen, look at your life and ask God as a friend. If you're going to God just on the big things, you're missing it. Because a friend is somebody you can call. Give me a ride to this. Can you give me a ride? Carry me to the store. That's North Carolina language for give me a ride to the store. Would you carry me to the store? I got a friend I call when I have to get on an airplane. I said, Mike, would you come give me a ride, carry me to the airport? Because I don't want Gloria to have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Mike, would you give me a ride to the airport? That's a small thing, but he's a friend. And since he's a friend, I can call him asking something like that. You can call and ask me something like that. That's who God is. And if you learn who God is in that friendship, friendly, walking with you way, when the hard times come or the desperate situation comes, friend, you're ready. You're prepared, you're prayed up, and you've been reveling in the love of God. We'll talk more about this later. God bless you.